Now here for the world this week. It's the world this week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The world this week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey has graced us with his presence. How are you?
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you. And we welcome Marc Basset's Paris correspondent for Spanish daily newspaper El País.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Busy week.
Yes, it is. Busy week.
Busy week as well for Ana Navarro Pedro, Paris correspondent for Portuguese magazine Visão.
Very well said.
Thank you. And forgive him if he has a bit of jet lag. Gregory Viscouze, he's been covering UN Week, journalist for Bloomberg News. Just back, we'll talk about UN Week a little bit later on. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. Let's start with Mexico, the aftermath of Tuesday's devastating earthquake, and listen, if you will, to the sound of silence. Yeah, sometimes it ends in cheers, sometimes in tears. Each time those fists that you saw are raised, frantic rescuers interrupt their race against time to listen out for survivors under the rubble.
All of this has been provided by normal people, not by companies, just ordinary people. Anyone who comes here wishing to help should be told that there are too many of us. I'd advise them to stay home and rest, and then come and take over at night, because this is going to be a long haul.
Yeah, the resilience, Christopher Dickey, of the citizens of Mexico City has been something spectacular to behold. And you heard a tinge of resentment in what that volunteer was saying, that basically these people are left to their own devices, to sometimes leaderless, says our correspondent.
Well, that's partly because there were so many people, people from the neighborhood, people came in from outside the neighborhoods where there was a lot of destruction. They poured in to do whatever they could, and they were able to do certain kinds of things. Yes, organizing themselves, and sometimes organized by government officials, like bucket brigades carrying masonry and refuse away from the sites, which is very difficult to do. I mean, I've been on a number of sites at earthquakes, after bombings, that kind of thing. And you have these collapsed buildings, and it's sort of like taking apart pickup sticks or a house of cards. You have to be very, very careful that the whole thing doesn't collapse. And when you have a lot of people, if they're disciplined enough, and it seems that the Mexicans were, you can really take it out brick by brick, stone by stone, and wind up rescuing a large number of people.
But yes, indeed. But at the same time, on another scale, what it says about the Mexican federal state and the local authorities is devastating, because no one in that country is expecting any help from the authorities. They are self-sufficient right from the beginning in trying to help and trying to save lives and trying to help others, because they are not expecting anything from the state. And I think that is devastating for any country nowadays.
Of course, the irony is that you had earlier in the day, before the quake struck, drills, because it was the 32nd anniversary of the 1985 quake that killed some 10,000.
And the drills are organized by the state. I think that Anna's being
It's a little unfair.
Yes.
I mean, when people rush out
I
to
think
help
she's
in
being
Houston, we hear about the great spirit of the Texans. When people rush out to help in Mexico, I think we should talk about the great spirit of the Mexicans. You know,
I think you had the spirit too. But you had something else that we wrote about at length in the Daily Beast, which was a little bit sinister, because there was so much, people so mistrust official information that social media took over, rumors took over in a way that you expect, but in a worse way, because it also got picked up by the media, by international media. The whole world was hanging on the existence of a little girl named Frida Sofia,
right,
who was buried under the rubble of this school and who never existed.
Yeah,
but whose existence was confirmed and kept us on the breath by the soldiers and the Marines, and I don't think that the guys on the ground were the ones who invented the story.
You really hate those Mexican government officials,
No. I think one should actually, have all the sides.
Is it the fault of those soldiers, or is it the fault of the media, Mark Bassetts? 19 children, 6 adults died in that school, but there was no... there was no Frida Sofia.
I think that the media will should do our job and check the information before publishing it, because with the social media we know about it. Twitter, social media, fake news, etc. Our job is to check the news. I don't know what the Mexican soldiers do about it.
Well, a lot of it was being driven by Televisa, as a matter of fact. I mean, you had this official news coming out saying, yes, there's this little girl.
They had a live feed permanently at the site.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody was absolutely hanging on it in Mexico and outside of Mexico. It was a huge thing. And then she was supposedly tweeting. Not tweeting, but texting.
It was the story, but
it was
a good
story,
communication diversion.
And it was all a lie.
And in the meantime, there have been actual people that have been rescued after 2 or 3 days from under the rubble. Coverage of natural disasters is something we've been talking about a lot lately after what happened in Houston and Hurricane Irma.
And Maria.
I mean, personally, I find it gets a little too much coverage sometimes. I mean, with the hurricanes, just watching people for hours on end standing in the rain, I thought got a little bit tedious.
Well, I don't think there's too much coverage, but there's too much coverage that doesn't advance the story.
Exactly.
You know.
It was the week where Madrid took its standoff with Barcelona to a whole new level. Protesters rallying in the Catalan capital to demand the release of the more than dozen regional officials arrested the same day. Spanish police confiscated 10 million ballot papers. And while all this was going on today in Barcelona, a third day of protests against those arrests, well, over in Madrid, the Interior Minister, Mark Bassetts, ordering more police reinforcements to go to Barcelona. Now, there was an independence referendum 3 years ago, which was also banned, whose results was never recognized. But you didn't have this kind of standoff. What's going on?
Well, 3 years ago, it was more like an informal consultation, referendum. Let's call it how we wanted, but it was not an official referendum. This referendum is called by the Catalan parliament against the Spanish constitution, so getting out of the Spanish rule of law illegally, that is, unilaterally, organized by one of the sides who is calling for yes vote. So it's the people from the yes vote are organizing this referendum. And the Spanish government has said this is not legal. You are breaking the law. We have even heard words like this is a coup d'etat because you are substituting the Spanish law in the Spanish land in Catalonia and getting outside of it. So this is a clash. We've been talking for years, for the last 4, 5, 6 years, about the train crash that was coming. Everybody saw it coming between the Spanish law and the Spanish rule of law, the Spanish democracy, and the will of a part and of a growing part of the Catalan people to vote on their sovereignty, to decide whether they wanted to stay or leave Spain. And it's now
But in places like Quebec and Scotland, they let them have their referendum. Why didn't they want to let them have the referendum in Madrid when we know that public opinion is already split in Catalonia?
Well, I'm not an expert in constitutional law, but the United Kingdom and Canada are really exceptions in constitutional comparative law in liberal democracies.
It's not a federation. Spain is not a federation.
It's not a federation, and most constitutions don't allow for the cessation of a part of this country. Most constitutions say, or the American Supreme Court, for instance, it is a united country and it cannot be broken.
Yeah, and both United Kingdom and Canada don't have this very close past of a dictatorship, and this idea of a very centralized power, strong central power, imposing its views on the rest of the country. I think there is something, reflex of an old political caste in Rajoy. This nosotros. we are going to show them, we are not going to bend. I think there is something of that type of attitude that is actually not just pertaining to Spain right now. We can see that type of attitude in the United States with Trump and an unleash of
but it was the
flexing muscle and showing muscle in
it was the same
negotiation and diplomacy.
It was the same Mariano Rajoy who was prime minister in 2014, the last time they had a referendum. Why is he taking a heavier hand this time?
As I just said, I think that internationally we are seeing that there is a kind of shift in the mood for a more muscled and more strong, steady reaction. That may be part of it. Secondly, is having right now the support of the Socialist Party. Podemos is a bit ambiguous on the situation. He's asking for negotiations, but it's not taking a strong stance, saying no, you cannot go and arresting people, sending the Guardia Civil. It's from the dictatorship. It's a strong memory in Spain.
Yes,
still.
but I think it's more complex than that.
Certainly, but he's doing everything he can to go for the clash in Catalonia. You bend, you break.
No, you could say that the Catalan independence movement is doing everything it can do to get a clash, and he has helped them out with this.
If you want.
What were you going to say, Mark?
No, it's important to say that there are, I think, two problems. There is a legal problem. The Catalan parliament and the Catalan government consciously have decided to get out of the Spanish law. They have said we don't report to the Spanish Constitutional Court, for instance. Okay, Spanish state. It's not a Francoist thing. It's a Spanish constitution, a Spanish law. It's written.
I'm talking about the attitude of Rajoy.
But they say we have to apply the law. The problem is it's not a legal problem. It's a political problem. Exactly. There is also a political problem that's been growing for years and years and years. The Spanish government hasn't had a reaction. I think that Rajoy has been passive. He didn't believe he thought it was a bluff, perhaps, but he has a big problem, a Spanish, Catalan, and European problem.
Marc Bassets, let's listen to the Catalonian president. He's a separatist. He spoke to France 24. Carles Puigdemont claims, that he's ready to talk with the Spanish prime minister.
A majority of Catalans do not agree with the relationship between Catalonia and Spain. The Catalan side is proposing a solution to improve this relationship. We propose independence. But we are ready to hear any other solutions proposed by the Spanish side. But when I ask the Spanish leaders, including Prime Minister Rajoy, if they have any other propositions to make, they've always said no.
Ready to hear any other solutions, Christopher D.
Well, as I'm listening to him and he's talking about the Catalans this, the Catalans that, maybe Mark could define this for us. Who's a Catalan? People who live in Catalonia? Or people who are historically in Catalonia and speak Catalan?
People who live in Catalonia. I would say he's referring to people who...
All the people who live in Catalonia.
There was an old Catalan president, the famous Jordi Pujol,
yes,
who was the father of modern Catalonia, even if he ended his career in corruption, etc.
Yes.
He said Catalan is everyone who lives and works in Catalonia. I think this definition
He said
is
that,
standard.
but I remember interviewing him about 25 years ago, and he said he was constantly talking about los inmigrantes, the immigrants. And I said, which are the los inmigrantes? And he said, people from Andalusia, basically people from the rest of Spain. So I always wondered whether that was a valid statement. Did he really mean that, or did he mean people who are from Catalonia?
I think they call, during the 60s and 70s, when there was a big wave of immigration in Spain, they call immigrants, just like I think in the United States, people who migrate from, I don't know, in the 30s, from the Okies who went to California, and they're inner immigrants, yeah.
Well, he was specific. He said, los inmigrantes, no estoy hablando de los moros.
Your newspaper, El País, its lead editorial on Thursday was headlined, Puigdemont's lies. It's taking a pretty strong stance against the president of Catalonia.
We are now in a critical moment. Both sides are in a critical moment. Rajoy is struggling to keep Spain together. And the Catalan government, President Puigdemont, is at the last steps, the last meters, the last miles of a fight that his and his party and his independence movement has had in the last years. And there is a war of words, a war of propaganda. The propaganda from obviously, as in every war, there is a propaganda from both sides, but the propaganda now of the Catalan government is pretty evident. There are much facts that are not clear. So this editorial tried to fact check, as the serious journalism does, all the propaganda lies that are coming from one side of this.
But does Puigdemont have a point when he says we're ready to talk? It's the other side that doesn't want to.
But he's called for a referendum for the 1st of October, not having a majority for the independence. 2 years ago there was an election in Spain and they had 48% of votes. He was called in a procedure that was pretty irregular in the Catalan parliament. So I think that we are in a moment where both sides have red lines, very strong red lines. He wants a referendum which is not regular, even not accepted by most of Catalans, because it's, as I said, the organizers are the partisans of the yes vote. For instance,
as Dick was saying before, the Catalans as well are rushing into it and going for the clash and doing it in the illegal way by all analysis of all law specialists. And the thing is, it would be so easy to demean it, because ask them just, what are you going to do? Okay, if you get independence, which is not a sure thing, but what are you going to do? You will not be, on the day of independence, you will not be anymore in European Union. How are people going to travel? How are companies going to trade? What are the trade deals you have? Do you have an army? Do you have, you have Los Mossos, you have your own police, but what are you going to do? You don't have a currency. So
they have a language.
They have a language, but just asking these questions, I think it would have calmed down everything. And no one did it. Rajoy didn't do it. Even the Spanish media, did they do it in a calm and consequent way?
It has been done, but there are two debates. One is independence, yes or no. The other is referendum, yes or no. So we still haven't had a referendum.
And there's still plenty more fireworks to come between now and October the 1st. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll see how Theresa May's olive branch to Europe went down. She gave a big speech in Florence, Italy. You're watching The World This Week.
The President of the European Commission struck an upbeat tone during
France 24 is now more than 10 years old. A different TV channel.
The party has also taken the parliament the first time.
3 international news channels broadcast in French, English, and Arabic. And starting from 26 September, France 24 will be broadcast in Spanish for 500 million Spanish speakers. A dedicated editorial team and a network of correspondents across the continent. A new view of Latin America for all France 24's channels.
You Are Here, your program spotlighting French heritage.
Versailles, the Louvre, and the Mont Saint-Michel are all well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbors many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24 and discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen, farmers to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You Are Here on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume The World This Week, some of the stories that Tom Burgess-Watson is following for you in the newsroom. Home stretch of Germany's general election campaign. The election slated to be the far right's breakout moment. Polls suggesting it'll win seats in parliament for the first time since the war. Angela Merkel speaking at a campaign rally live right now in Munich. By decree, France's president signs ordinances to loosen labor law, bypassing parliament and shrugging off protests by unions and the far left. Catholic bishops call for the daily ringing of church bells across the Philippines for 40 nights to pray for an end to President Duterte's war on drugs. It's left more than 3,800 dead over a space of 15 months. Iraqi Kurdistan's leader resists pressure to postpone or cancel next Monday's independence referendum. Masoud Barzani says yes to talks, but only after the vote. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Mark Bassets, the Paris correspondent for Spanish daily newspaper El País. From weekly Portuguese magazine Visão, we say hello to Ana Navarro Pedro. And from Bloomberg News, we say hello to Gregory Viscusi. She called for creative solutions. Theresa May choosing to deliver her big Brexit speech from Florence, Italy, a nod to the trade routes of old that ran through Europe, and offering to pay up for the sums that London owes Brussels, suggesting a 2-year transition period under which Britain would stay in the single market. She even put positive spin on the negotiations so far.
We've now conducted 3 rounds of negotiations, and while at times those negotiations have been tough, it's clear that thanks to the professionalism and diligence of David Davis and Michel Barnier, we have made concrete progress.
Professionalism of David Davis and Michel Barnier. There were probably a few eyebrows raised, Christopher Dickey, in Brussels when they heard that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, look, the press about the negotiations has been largely negative. Things have not gone very well. In fact, part of the reason for this speech is that she comes out and she says, here's actually a framework we can talk about, although it's still vague on a lot of issues. And of course, this is coming after, at the beginning of the week, Boris Johnson, her foreign secretary, came out with his own plan for Brexit and threw the entire British cabinet into turmoil.
Well, what struck me as I was watching her speech today is why are they bothering? I mean, she basically was saying nothing's going to change. We'll still have free trade.
Well, that's what
your citizens will still be able to come and go.
That's what Nigel Farage said, basically.
You know, so like, why are we going through all this? You know, that was the
Liberal Democrats. That's the actually.
She didn't lay out one thing that would be different after Brexit than Britain's current situation with the EU right now. Which, after all, let's not forget that the British have gotten all sorts of opt-out clauses. So they already don't, you know, they don't have open borders, they don't have the euro, and so it doesn't sound like her vision of Brexit is any different than what the Britain has right now.
Well, I think the process goes on for 2 years to 2019, and then it goes on for 2 more years.
Yeah, buying time.
But even after that, she says that she wants things to stay the same.
2021. But there is a difference. There is a difference, which is that before Brexit, Britain had a voice in the councils of the European Union. Now it's not going to have any voice.
Mark Bassett, you're a former Brussels correspondent. You've covered many of these summits where there were crises, and they always have what they call a Brussels fudge, where they kind of, you just sort of, things get moved along down the road. Are we going to be talking Brexit for years and possibly decades?
Possibly, but what is interesting in this issue, I think, is that the rest of the European Union has already forgotten about Brexit. So Macron, Merkel are doing their job. They're thinking about the European Union post-Brexit. They're organizing the new ways to go forward and to get Europe out of the crisis that has lived in the last years. And this will be for Brussels almost, I would say, technical negotiation, which is an existential issue for Great Britain. But for Brussels, it's Barnier, who's a great negotiator, who will be doing the job. But the rest of Europe has already... It's in the next stage.
I think that's a big point, that if the British ever did change their mind, I think the resistance would come from the other Europeans, who right now are like, good riddance, we want to move on with the French cooperation, we want to move on.
It's like 1 foot out kind of thing.
Yeah, just like, go.
And it does seem that Theresa May is trying to buy time for maybe a turnaround of the UK, but it's doomed for them. It's really doomed.
She basically said, I want a divorce, but I still want to stay at home. You know, we'll still have dinner together every night.
Let's live together.
Let's live together.
I mean, we are, in Europe, actually, we are seeing that if we don't want to stay a dominion of the United States, we do have to have an independent defense, working maybe with NATO, but not under the umbrella of NATO. And for that purpose, UK has to be out of European Union, because so far they've been the ones who have always stopped any
Yeah, but she
attempt
does
of
have
that
a
process.
she does have a point when she says they're still part of Europe. I mean, look how many British nationals live in Portugal and France.
Okay, but then
And how many Portuguese live in
why are we going
Britain?
through all
I know.
this? But then why are we going through all this?
Look, the European Union operates by consensus and often has to have a unanimous vote. When Britain was part of it, it could stop what it wanted to stop.
Exactly.
Now it's not.
All right, Mark.
So adios, as we say in Europe.
Mark Masset's talking about moving on. They'll be voting Sunday in Germany. And it's kind of strange. It's not about who will win, but who she will govern with. She, of course, is Angela Merkel, with her Christian Democrats enjoying a double-digit lead over the center-left SPD. It's really all about who finishes third. How wonky is that, Christopher Dickey, that we're discussing who finishes third?
Well, it is very wonky, and you sort of start to talk to an American audience about it, and they sort of drift off very quickly. Because, first of all, we've been through so many elections that seem to have potentially cataclysmic results. Either they did, like Brexit, or we could say the United States, or they didn't, like in France, where if there was a cataclysm, it was in the other direction. Now we've got Germany, and there's no cataclysm coming. We're just talking, as you say, about who comes in third. But because the alternative for Deutschland, alternative for Germany, may come in third. It's, I think, polling at 13% now, and could wind up with a real foothold for the first time, far right, extreme right, in the Bundestag. That changes the dynamic of the Bundestag. It doesn't mean that Merkel can't rule. And, look, her opponent, Schulz, has been part of her government, his party has been part of the government before. They say they won't be part of it again. I'm sure they will be part of it.
But it's just a funny contrast with France, where, in the first round, Macron gets 24% of the vote, and now he's got every lever of power.
Yeah.
In Germany, she's going to get 35%, and she's going to have to go looking for coalition partners.
Right.
I mean, it really does show this very funny divide between France and Germany.
Speaking of France, Mark Basset's, she will perhaps govern with the Free Democrats, pro-European, but in favor of a German version of Europe. And therefore, it could be the end of Emmanuel Macron's dream of some kind of a grand agreement whereby you can have a reinforced Eurozone with a finance minister and the such.
There is even if they are allies, Merkel and Macron, there is a huge contrast between both personalities and both visions of Europe. Well, Macron has a vision, a very lyrical even vision.
Jupiterian.
I remember that there was an American president, I think it was George Bush, the father, said, this is the vision thing, it's not my thing, something like that. So for Merkel, it's not the vision thing. She's not a vision person. She's a pragmatic person. She doesn't dream about big lyrical and Jupiterian Europe. I think there is a possible debate, discussion, clash between both in the near future.
Just before we move on this, the alternative for Deutschland, Christopher Dickey was mentioning it, Ana Navarro Pedro. Germany's the only big country in Europe that doesn't have a far right in that respect, outside of Spain, perhaps. And the thing is, will a showing of 10% be a victory or a defeat for Germans?
Big question. I think it will be a defeat nonetheless, given the past of Germany, but also the fact that their tale of very successful integration of that huge wave of refugees and migrants like a year ago, 2 years ago, it will bring down the idea that Germany did really accept that.
Even if it's just 10%?
I think so. In a country like in France, it's something else. But in a country like Germany, to have a far right that is not far away, has been called like pro-Nazi and near, to have yes, it's really a historical defeat for Germany. But politically, it will be different. And I don't think. I think 10% will have a weight on Germans' European policy, actually.
Just very quickly what you said about the Free Democrats. I mean, look, she's just come out of a coalition with the SDP, which is a much bigger party than the Free Democrats, and it was very much her government. She ran the show. So I'm not really sure a coalition with a much smaller Liberal Democrats will really have that much bearing on her policy. I mean, she runs the show.
Yeah, I think there's also an irony with the AfD. which is that, as Anna Nemtsova reported, our Moscow correspondent went to Berlin to do some reporting. And, you know, there's about 4 million Germans who are from the former Soviet Union and who are Russian-speaking and who watch Russian media all the time, and a lot of them are supporters of the AfD.
Yeah.
So it's a weird thing where you've got Russian immigrants, white Russian immigrants, basically supporting the party that is opposed to darker-skinned immigrants.
If Gregory Viscusi, by the way, was suffering jet lag when he landed in New York for UN Week, surely you were wide awake when you heard this.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about.
How did that go down?
There were a few gasps in the room where I was when he said that, but they were also talking to people afterwards. Didn't speak to anyone who agreed with what he said, but there was a certain sense that he actually was not a bad speech in the sense that he did lay out a doctrine. He did lay out I mean, I was talking about this with Christopher before, whether it's a coherent doctrine or not, because you could point to some hypocrisies in this doctrine. But there actually was a doctrine that was laid out, unlike some of his other speeches, which have been these sort of, you know, apocalyptic visions of the world. It was not a bad speech.
What were the fundamentals of that doctrine?
The doctrine would just be, I mean, this whole notion of sovereignty, of nations looking after themselves and sort of being, you know, coalitions of the willing to beat up on the bad guys of the world. Very selective list of bad guys, of course, which is what I was talking about with Christopher before. You know, he certainly believes in interfering in some countries and not in others.
Yeah.
Sovereignty for some and not
sovereignty and some and not for others. Yeah, I said there was hypocrisy involved. I never said it was completely without hypocrisy. But it laid out a rather strong sort of Trumpian vision of the world.
Were you surprised in any way?
Well, I was surprised at everyone about his promise to wipe, how he said,
destroy.
Totally destroy.
Totally destroy.
The advantage that Trump has is that when he doesn't have a chaotic and hinged speech, it looks as a good speech, you know, because it will be a normal speech from a leader from a normal country. A lot of people are applauding him because it was just not a crazy rant.
Well, it was, yeah. It was
apparently, the speech was written by Stephen Miller.
He didn't write it, of course. He didn't write it.
It was written by Stephen Miller, who was his political advisor, and apparently Stephen Miller was quite open to some notes that are being passed on to him by influential people in Washington. Maybe you will confirm this information. Mainly some working for foundations, like Cato Foundation and so forth, and telling him, don't make a gloomy speech like the one on when he inauguration
and also in Warsaw when he spoke about the will.
It would be too somber for United Nations. And apparently he was quite willing to take some advice, and there are some channels of communication.
As we pointed out in the Daily Beast the day of the speech, a lot of it reads almost as if it was plagiarized from a speech that Vladimir Putin gave in 2015. All the riff about sovereignty, this is exactly the way Putin speaks. And while he was talking about sovereignty, as many people pointed out in the United States, he didn't mention the Russian infringement of American sovereignty by trying to completely screw up America's presidential elections.
And then he goes on saying that he might invade Venezuela if, you know, which is just a neighbor on the south.
Making the world safe for hypocrisy kind of thing. I mean.
Well, the answer in kind came from Pyongyang, from Kim Jong-un, and you know he means business when star presenter Ri Chun-hee reads out the North Korean leader's statements. The choice line, quote, "I will surely and definitely tame the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire."
Is that how you pronounce it?
I'm not sure how you pronounce dotard.
We were looking it up. Dotted, right? Doted, I think it is.
Yeah.
Like, how old is their dictionary?
Rambling man, right?
Rambling old man.
Rambling old man, right?
Yeah, we smile at these remarks.
No, it's not funny. It's not.
No, it's not funny. I think what was really when I read that entire statement, one of the things that I found most disturbing about it is that aside from some arcane language, in some ways, it was more coherent than the speeches that we've seen from President Trump. It was very clear. But what is Kim talking about doing? And frankly, what is Trump talking about doing? He's not going to totally destroy North Korea under any circumstances. What he's really talking about is taking out the Kim regime. That's what he's threatening. That's what he wants Kim to fear, that he'll take out the Kim regime. But as we wrote in the Daily Beast, then what? What happens then? And it's pretty clear what happens then. The Chinese move south, the South Koreans and the Americans move north, and somewhere in the middle of what used to be North Korea, they meet. And then what happens?
Exactly.
But does anyone have a better solution for North Korea? I mean, that's
you mean then getting rid of Kim?
No, I'm just saying no one has a solution. And all this talk that the French have of an Iran-style, nuclear accord with North Korea. I mean, Iran for all of its Iran for all of its faults is a country that engages with the world. It wants to be engaged with the world. It's a part of the world community. There was a whole carrot and stick negotiations you could do with the Iranians, and they came up with a good accord. I'm not sure that applies to North Korea.
I don't know, but this time, right now, we need to gain time. We need to buy time because things can get really messy for all of us.
And you have to remember, in 1994, Bill Clinton almost went to war with North Korea. We came within days, if not hours, of doing that. Jimmy Carter, of all people, went to North Korea, talked to, I guess it was Kim Jong-il then, and they came to an agreement which stopped the program for more than a decade. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that you can negotiate with the North Koreans, but it is out of the realm of possibility because this is what happened, that if you negotiate with them and come to a deal and the U.S. Congress and the executive decide that they don't really want to honor all those stipulations in the agreement, which is what we see going on with Iran right now.
And I mean, if we drop out of the Iran agreement, who's ever going to sign any agreement with us? So.
Forbes' annual rich list branded her the world's wealthiest woman. L'Oreal heiress Liliane Bettencourt passed away this week at the age of 94, a 33 billion euro fortune that was much coveted, it seems. The announcement made by her daughter, Françoise Myers Bettencourt, who'd actually sued to wrest away control of her estate from her elderly mother under the influence, she said, of handlers. Her money most famously handed in big wads of cash in the hands of Nicolas Sarkozy when he had his winning run for president in 2007. And Liliane Bettencourt is a subject of fascination in this country and from many fronts. But I guess the big one is she's only number 14 on the world's rich list. And she was worth 33 billion euros. How can one person be worth that much money?
You own a large percentage of a large company. It's not, the math's very simple. They had 30-some% of L'Oreal, which is the world's biggest company.
How does she do it with French taxes? That's what I'm still trying to figure out.
There's that issue, and of course, Bettencourt's relationship with politicians.
Well, and with the guy who was her walker, her friend, the photographer, who, her daughter and others claim that she may have given as much as $1 billion to him. That was the question that the daughter sued her about, was her relationship with him. I think that maybe she was a bit of a doted, actually.
Interesting to actually make a very good investigation on L'Oreal and the family who has held it for so long, because it's part of the way how Europe and the Western world was made after Second World War. And you remember her father was pro-Nazi, and L'Oreal was helping Nazis after the war escaping, and they never had any Jews for a long time working there. So, and they made a lot of money. So it would be interesting to question,
There is a good book that just came out by Thomas Sankton, the former Time bureau chief here, that is, in fact, a biography of Liliane Bettencourt, and that goes into a lot of that.
But it was a tiny company until the 60s and 70s. The big expansion of L'Oreal didn't begin until the 70s. So, I mean, it was a tiny company at the time. Their wealth does not come from the Second World War. It comes from the massive expansion that took place under Lindsay Owen.
Mark Bassett, your takeaway from the passing of Liliane Bettencourt?
No, I think it's her story, really. It's a fascinating story. It could be, I wasn't aware that there was a book just published about her, but it's the subject of a novel or could be of a big film, because you have the as we are explaining, the 20th century with all the dramas.
A certain working of companies and politicians everywhere in Europe, and that is the fascinating part.
Well,
not just about the company and ourselves.
We're going to leave it there for now. Anna Navarro-Pedro, Christopher Dickey, Mark Bassett, Gregory Viscusi, many thanks. But stay with us, please. Media Watch is next.